Hey everyone, welcome to the Lead Well Podcast. This is Pastor Steve Owens. I'm your host here at the Lead Well Podcast. Hey, we have a great episode lined up for you today. Today we have Dr. Mark Croston on the episode. Listen, it's going to bless your life. Dr. Mark Croston is the National Director of Black Church partnerships over at Lifeway bookstores. Listen, make sure you stay around to hear this episode. You're going to be encouraged by it. But before we jump into the episode, if this is your first time here at the Lead Well Podcast, just want to let you know what we're about here. First off, what we want to do is encourage leaders to lead well for the glory of Jesus Christ. So to do that, we bring on leaders from around the world to share their stories and to give their insight and wisdom on how we're able to lead well for the glory of Jesus. But listen, if you have a heart for leaders, we would love for you to partner with us here at the Lead Well Podcast so that we can be able to reach and encourage more leaders so that they can be able to grow and develop in their leadership skills. And if you're looking for a free resource, please go over to my website, stephenowens.org, and sign up for the Lead Well newsletter, and you'll receive a free download of a ebook that I wrote entitled Rescuing Ambition. I believe the book will encourage you and bless your life. All right, with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump into this episode of the Lead Well Podcast. All right. Hey, Dr. Croston, thank you so much for coming on to the Lead Well Podcast. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So just being able to look at your bio, man, you got a lot going on. You're the National Director for with Lifeway for Black Church Partnership. You lead the effort for Black Church Leadership and Family Conference. You pastor for 26 years. Man, this is amazing. Thank you so much for coming on to share your wisdom.
Oh, well, it's a privilege to be able to serve.
Yeah. So got some questions here for you, and I'd love to just jump in and talk about leadership. So why do you think leadership is so important, especially in this current climate we're in when it comes to, the COVID-19 and being some states are opening back up? Why do you think leadership is important, especially now?
Well, leadership is always important. I can remember in seminary, one of my favorite definitions of leadership has always been taking people someplace that they don't want to go. And so people don't always have the time or invest the energy to really think about the deeper details of where life is going, where my institution ought to be going, where the times and channels are going. And so somebody's got to think about those things and then think about how we get logistically from here to where we want to go. So I'm reminded of two scriptures in the Bible. Both are in the Chronicles. First Chronicles 12:23-32. You've probably heard people use that over and over again. It says, from the Issacharites who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. And so people like to use that one that, we ought to be people who understand the times and know what we should do. And so that works in normal times. But this pandemic is something that none of us have ever experienced in our lifetime. So it's not that we haven't had pandemics like this before, but we have not had this in our lifetime.
Sure.
And so given that, I think 2 Chronicles 20:12 may be another scripture that helps us. There, the person says, "Oh God, will you not judge them? for we are powerless before this vast number that comes to fight against us. And listen to this, we don't know what to do, but we look to you.
Amen.
And often, I think that's where people are in life. We don't know what to do, so we look to you. So here, the person is talking about the fact about looking to God, which we always need to do. But very often, people look for leadership. You know, we look for national leadership. We look for political leadership. We look for religious leadership and business leadership, financial leadership. So who has the insight, who's going to be able to tell us, read the times, know what to do, and then that's the person we look to because we don't know what to do.
Oh, that's real good. That's real good. So as I was listening to you, so I was kind of thinking through, okay, so as a leader, we need to be thinking through what's the next steps we need to go to, and then thinking logistically. I think sometimes we have some issues, even as leaders, trying to think systematically about where we need to go. Any thoughts on that to kind of dig in more?
Well, one of my seminary professors, Ernie White, said, don't be a hound dog leader. He said the hound dog would be in front of the master's cart as he's going into town. But when they would get to the fork in the road, the hound dog really didn't know which direction to go. It said the horse always knew which way to go to town, but the hound dog never knew. And so the hound dog would sit at the fork of the road until the horse went on the correct path to go to town, and then the hound dog would run back in front as if he was a leader the whole time. So don't be a hound dog leader. So don't just look to, this is not the time for people who want to claim to be leaders, who really are just trying to follow the trends. Where's everybody going? And let me get in front of that so that I can look like I'm taking you there. These are times when we need people with real insight who are really thinking about what are the dynamic changes that are happening in society as a result of this pandemic environment that we're in. Preachers have been preaching about a shift, for a long time. Oh, the shift is, well, I want to say the shift is here. This is the real shift that we're in right now. And so we need to think about, how is this fundamentally going to change the church and what we do, and other parts of our society as well. But for us, we want to talk about how this is going to really fundamentally impact and change the church.
That's so good. I appreciate the fact that you speaking of like trends and kind of looking at what everybody else is doing. But I think while a leader does look at those things, we got to bring it down home and say, okay, so how does this affect our particular ministry, mm-hmm. right? Because each church is different, in culture and things like that. So what do you think, leaders, when we take it from like a national look at churches, but then how do we bring that home to our local church? Like, what does that look like? What should we be thinking about when it comes to like small groups?
Okay.
How does that change us? Should we be thinking through stuff like that?
All right. So let me just say that the reason we need leaders who really think about the future is because you can follow trends that are wrong, right? And so if all you're doing is trying to follow what everybody else is doing, the majority can go wrong. And so you got to always be careful about that. So this is what I'm thinking about this pandemic. There are a lot of negative things that are happening. We watch the news every day, and we see the number of COVID cases going up, and we see the number of deaths going up, and they're really dramatic. So there's a lot of grief, a lot of hurt, angst, and pain out there. A lot of people losing their jobs, people struggling for food and how they're going to survive. So the news does a great job of reporting that stuff. So what I want to think about is there a good side to any of this, right? So the old hymn would say, "There's a bright side somewhere, and don't you rest until you find it."
Amen.
And so what is the bright side here if we can discover it? Romans 8:28, remember, says he works all things together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. Ecclesiastes 3:15 says, God makes everything beautiful in its time. So what is this? Is there a silver lining? Is there a bright side to any of this? So one of the things I would say is that there have been a lot of churches are typically, many of our churches are typically conservative and traditional and don't want to, and what we would call late adopters, and don't want to move outside their box. My mom had an old 45, not this 45, and not this 45, a 45 record. So,
Gotcha.
So she had an old 45, and it had a preacher back in I guess the 1920s preaching, and the title of his sermon was "The Devil and the Flying Machine." And I can remember as a boy putting that record on and playing it over and over again, listening to this guy preach about the evils of flying, and just laughing and getting a kick out of that whole thing and everything. So I think that just kind of talks about where sometimes we are. As pastors and leaders, often we get in a comfort zone, right? Yeah. And so once we get in a comfortable place and we know how everything works and we kind of like the way this is, we get resistant to the idea of change. Yeah. And so this world is changing exponentially. And we don't even realize how quickly things are changing all around us. And so that means that the church continually has to change and adapt to whatever the changing circumstances of the world are. So when I went to my church out of seminary in Virginia, the church was 100 years old, 99 years old on the day I got there, 99. And you walk in and it was almost 1990, but it was inside the church. It was like it was still the 1950s, literally. I mean, even the songs were from the we're from that era, and I can document that. They had made a record in 1960, and so I went and played this record, and the same songs that were their hits in 1960 were the same songs I was hearing them sing every Sunday, almost in 1990. Wow. And the only thing that had changed were the soloists, because the old soloists had died and new soloists had to be pushed in place. So
Jesus, all right.
But that just illustrates the idea that churches are resistant to change. So I started quoting the old hymn. Sometimes you got to take people back in order to move them forward, right? And so the old hymn would say, "There's a charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a light to shine, a soul to save, and fitted for the sky." There's another verse down there that says, "To serve this present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my master's will." And that's our challenge. Our challenge is to serve the present age. And the problem with that is that keeps on changing. Yeah. the present age keeps on changing, and the target keeps on moving. But if we're going to just, try to keep things locked up and locked down the same, then we're really not serving the present age. Mm-hmm. So here's part of what I would say is part of the bright side of this pandemic that we're in. That I feel like God has locked the church down in order to push the church out.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
So we lots of times we get comfortable in our buildings, and we've been taking care of our buildings and building bigger buildings and all this kind of stuff. And so when there's a world out there that needs to be reached, mm-hmm. and so many pastors and churches have been resistant to using new technologies, using new evangelism strategies, doing things that will help them. The message never changes. The message of the gospel is good, but our delivery systems have to change. Mm-hmm. And so many of our churches have been resistant to this idea. And so now God is doing a couple of things. One, I see God helping us to see that the church is not in the building. Huh? We in the middle of March, the church left the building, and we haven't been back there since. Right. So the fact that we can still have church and be church and not be in the building, it ought to be revolutionized in some people's minds. Mm-hmm. But it's not revolutionized in everybody's mind. I know this because there are lots of people, and the only conversation they have is when we get back to the building. Yeah. When we get back to the building. No, that's really not the conversation I want to have right now. Mm-hmm. The conversation I want to have is, what do we do while we're not in the building? Yeah, because if we can grab a hold and master not being in the building, then we have also gained tools and strategies that will help us to propel the church forward, even if we get back in the building. Yeah. So I don't care about when we get back. I'm not looking for a date to get back. I'm not in a hurry to get back. Okay. So this is what I've seen. I've seen pastors who thought that they couldn't do anything online now doing it. Right. I talked to one pastor and I said, what's your church going to do now that the shutdown has come? He said, oh, we're not going to be able to do anything. I said, so I talked to him and said, man, all you need is a teenager and a cell phone. Come on. And good. So began to walk with him through some initial strategies and things he could employ, mm-hmm. low cost, but big impact. Yeah. For his church, and so now he's doing stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Churches that have not had online giving, right? Mm-hmm. Any kind of e-giving are now doing that. And I've been saying for years to pastors, if you don't have some kind of online giving, I would say all your members 35 and under are walking out with your money every Sunday. So because you have not provided for them a way to give, because they don't carry cash. Right. And, that's good. So now, and so here's what I'm hearing from a lot of churches. I'm hearing from a lot of churches that we have more people visiting our church and our worship on Sunday now online than we've ever had before. Amen. And this is what I'm hearing. We have more people in our Bible studies, even our members, not even counting other people. We have more of our members in Bible study now than we've ever had before. Mm-hmm. And in a number of churches, and a lot, I'm hearing this more and more. I'm hearing pastors say, after the first couple weeks when they didn't know how things were going to go, there are more and more pastors saying, our offerings have not missed a beat. Amen. And some of them are saying, we're doing better with our offerings now than we were when we were at the church. Amen. So what I'm suggesting is that, God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. this is Bible 101 right here. And when God put Adam and Eve in the garden, he didn't put them in there and say, y'all just have a good time. Mm-hmm. He said their job was to subdue the earth.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
So now, if you got any kind of grass growing or garden around your house, that you have to take care of it. You can't just leave it out there alone and think that you're going to have a beautiful lawn.
Absolutely right.
That is not going to happen. You got to cut it. You got to weed it. You got to fertilize it. And but you cannot just leave it alone. If you leave it alone, the weeds will take over. Huh?
Absolutely.
And your grass and lawn will look like a hot mess if you don't take care of it. Well, the world is our lawn. That's what God told us in Genesis.
That's good.
And he said, subdue the earth. And so that means to me that our job is to bring everything in this world under the control of the Almighty. Subdue the earth. Everything ought to bow to his authority and to his will and to his kingdom. So when we lock ourselves in our church, and we can have a good time in the church, and our little potted plant church will look beautiful. But it's sitting in the middle of an unkept yard.
Amen.
Huh?
You preaching, Doc.
The world is the unkept yard. And now this is what I've seen. God is pushing the church out so that the internet and all of this stuff, I wish I have a little video that I could show you, but you wouldn't be able to see it on your podcast. It really just talks about how quickly and rapidly things are really changing in this world that we're living in. And so if the church is not, and the internet has been a big part of that, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Do you remember? You might be able to remember when we only had 4 channels on television, 3 or 4 channels.
Oh, Jesus. That's a little bit before my time. Just a little bit.
This is prior to cable television.
Okay. Gotcha.
And when the TV used to go off at night.
I do remember that. Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
And do you know when that changed? Do you know when that changed?
No, when was that?
That changed when Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States.
Oh, come on.
And there was the Iranian crisis. And during that time, Ted Koppel came on ABC News, and he started doing Nightline.
Okay. And
he said, I am not going off the air at night until this crisis is over. And all of a sudden now, TV started going later than we were used to. So it used to be 11 o'clock news, Johnny Carson, TV off, right? Now the TV is going on into the night. Then CNN came with cable news, right? Yeah. And so what do you do if you have a news station that runs? It used to be the news was only like, a half hour in the morning, and then a half hour at dinner time, and a half hour local news, half hour national news at dinner time, half hour summary at night, right? But and that meant that they had to take all of the news from the world, synthesize it into bite-sized segments, figure out what was most important, and then give us the most important stuff out of all the stuff that's going on.
Gotcha.
But now we have news 24/7.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, 24/7. So since the news is 24/7, that means that there's a lot of stuff that's coming on the news that we really didn't even need to talk about. But they have to fill up 24/7 worth time of news,
Yeah.
So somebody's got to help us to filter all of this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but really, I'm talking about this idea of change. So, so the internet, on top of cable TV comes the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so the internet now has opened the world to everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It used to be that something would happen in China and we'd hear about it like 6 months later.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, 6 months ago, such happened in China.
Right.
Now, when something happens in some little hamlet
Mm-hmm.
in Africa,
Right.
or some little village in China,
Mm-hmm.
we see it live.
Right.
Let me take you right over there to this little village in China and show you exactly what's happening right now.
Right. Absolutely.
So times are changing much more rapidly than people ever realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if we're not, so here's the point, if we're not in this cyberspace with the gospel, then the weeds are going to grow up and take over everything.
Yeah.
The devil loves the fact that church people are late adopters and don't want to get involved, because that gives him every opportunity to get a foothold and to take over and to mess everything up.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's one of the bright sides of this pandemic. I believe that more people are hearing the gospel today.
Amen.
Huh?
Amen.
With the churches closed down.
Mm-hmm.
Let me change that. With the church buildings closed down,
yeah,
the church is opening up.
Amen. Yeah. The
church buildings are shut, and more people are hearing the gospel today. After since March 15th and forward, more people be hearing the gospel today than were hearing it before March 15th.
That's good. That's good. That's good.
So there's a bright side to this whole thing, and a lesson to be learned before we get back into our buildings.
Yeah, that's good.
Because if you don't learn the lesson, this from school, you got to repeat the class.
Yeah, that's good. There was so much in there to unpack. My goodness, right? So the one thing that really was a couple of things that really jumped out at me. Well, the first one was that crisis produces innovation.
Yes.
Like when something happens, you got to figure out what to do. And we see that the tools are there available for us. We just need somebody to kind of, as you said with the pastor you talked through, just simple ways to get on, right? And then the other thing was the importance of cultivation, right? Not just working in it, but working on it, right? So the importance of us working on the ministry. So how did you get to this mindset where you said, you know what, let me be the kind of person that works on ministry, not just work in ministry?
Well, I just think I've always been inquisitive. So I think that is part of my nature. When growing up as a boy, I can remember, our house had a basement, and I would take stuff down in the basement and start taking it apart. My mama had an iron, and I can remember taking her electric iron apart. Let me see how this thing is put together. I want to see how it works. So, so I've always been inquisitive in that regard. And I think that is one of the skills that leaders need. Yeah, absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Leaders need to not just accept what is, right? But also think about how this works. And so I'm trying to think of a quote. There's a quote like that. I think it was John F. Kennedy who said not to just ask about what is, but ask about what ought to be, or something like that. Yeah. And so I think that leaders have to do that. that's the only way you are leading, right? Means that you're taking people somewhere.
Yeah.
Right. So my same leadership professor in seminary said that said our job, leadership is not the same as administration. He said administration is the hands-on ministry. It's doing stuff. That's not leadership.
Right.
The leadership is not the same as management. Management is the eyes-on ministry. You're making sure things are happening the right way. That's still not leadership. You can be a great administrator and a great manager and still never lead anybody anywhere.
Oh, that's good.
Leadership, he says, is the moving on ministry. How do we move the organization from where we are to where we need to be?
Yeah.
So as every leader, this is what I would believe, every true leader, if you're doing everything, even though you have the title, president, director, pastor, whatever, if you're doing it all, you are not a leader.
Oh, that's good.
You are a doer.
Yeah.
So as a leader, this is the way I always envisioned it. I want to leave the organization better when I'm finished with it than it was when I got it.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, wherever it needs to go, I want it to be farther down this line toward what it ought to be or what it needs to be when I'm finished with it than when I started with it.
Yeah.
So I can remember being in one group and there was a certain segment that wasn't supporting this one leader. And I went up, talked to the leader offline. I said, don't let this thing die on your watch.
Yeah. Amen.
Leadership. And so ain't nothing going to die on my watch.
Yeah.
So on my watch, we are going to move it somewhere and it's going to be better somehow.
Yeah.
But I just think that that's a big part of our challenge, making sure that perceiving what the times are, asking God to give us some guidance, right? And then how do we move it? And so it takes courage, right? So I just listened to a guy just this morning. He talked about the fact that it's easier to make some of these changes in a crisis time than it is in a normal time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. So, and looking for you to make some changes.
Leaders, take advantage of this time. Think about what the real changes need to be, but take advantage of this time and make some of these forward moves as we're in this crisis moment, because it's easier in the crisis than it is in the regular time.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate too, you talking about the importance of moving the organization, right? Not letting it die on your watch. Because there's some people right now, pastors even right now, who are still at this point not adopting any of the changes that need to go forth so that their ministries can continue to flourish. I've been telling the church, listen, even while the doors are closed, we still gonna make disciples of Jesus Christ that love God and people. Now we just got to figure out how to do that in this climate, right? Because the mission ain't changed. We still got to tell people about Jesus, help them meet them, and help people come like them, right? All right, so let's shift a little bit then. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what are you reading these days? Because we want to encourage our community to continue to be reading and to learn. Is there any books you would encourage anybody to read?
Okay, so since we're talking about this issue right now, one of the books I would say is The Four Disciplines of Execution. So I've taught this book and these principles over and over again to pastors because it is such a vital issue for us. Most pastors have great ideas. Most leaders have a lot of great ideas.
Right.
But how many times have you had a dream? how many times have you had an idea and it maybe even you wrote it down? Here's our plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here are the 10 things we're going to accomplish this year for our church.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the 3 things I want to do for my life. And so, or here's our strategic plan for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you write all that stuff down. You get together, you have meetings, you get your minds right, and you write all this stuff down, and it looks beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But then you come back a year, 2 years, 5 years, and much of it we have never accomplished. And so, sometimes somebody would say, "Oh, didn't we have a plan for that?" And he said, "Oh yeah, we do. It's written down somewhere," right? So we're a lot better at coming up with ideas and even writing down plans than we are getting it done. So this book has just been super helpful to many pastors. The 4 disciplines of execution. Let's see, I can share the cover. So there it is, the 4 disciplines of execution.
Oh, good stuff. Okay.
It has been, because what it does is takes us beyond the idea of envisioning what we want to do and writing down what we want to do, mm-hmm. to talk about then how do we actually execute with excellence in order to really get it done. And I think that this is where most of us fall down. That most of us have great ideas, most of us have supervisions, but most of us have not yet grabbed a hold of the management of the execution process so that we can actually be successful in doing that.
Oh, that's a blessing. So taking it from idea to completion, right?
Yes. Yes.
How we get it done.
Yes.
Very helpful. Very helpful.
Absolutely.
Well, Doc, how can people connect with you on social media, or just in general? How can they reach out to you, connect with you?
Okay. All right. So on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere else, you get two things you're going to look for. You can look for Black Church Life. Those 3 words, keep those together. Black Church Life. Or you can look for Mark Croston 07. You'll find those on any of those platforms. You can also come to lifeway.com. Come to lifeway.com, put /Black Church Life, or crostonministries.org. crostonministries.org. Any of those are ways to reach out now or in the future.
All right, Doc. Dr. Croston, I really appreciate you coming on to the podcast. I know you're busy, you got a lot going on, but I appreciate you coming, sharing your wisdom and encouraging the community. We'll definitely have you back.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for all that you're doing right now in this critical time, getting this word out into this internet space.
Amen. Amen. Well, all right, brother. I'll be talking to you soon. All right.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, bye now.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Croston. Listen, I know I did. It blessed me. But listen, if you're interested in developing your leadership skills, please send me an email. I'd love to see how we could be able to work together and possibly become your leadership coach to help you take your leadership to the next level. And also, if you're not even interested in leadership coaching, but just want to connect, hey, connect with me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram. I'm also on Twitter. Reach out to me. I love to connect with you. All right, that concludes this episode of the Lead Well podcast. Hey, and remember, leaders must lead well. All right, God bless you. Till next time.